The wind howled across the high plains of West Texas like a preacher's warning, kicking up red dust that stung the eyes and clung to the soul. In the year 1887, the town of Redemption Hollow was little more than a cluster of weathered clapboard buildings huddled against the endless prairie, where the horizon stretched so far it seemed to mock the smallness of men's dreams. On the edge of town stood the white-steepled church, its cross glinting like a promise under the merciless sun. Inside, on this sweltering Sunday afternoon, 18-year-old Eliza Thorne knelt alone in the front pew, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. She was the preacher's virgin daughter, pure as the driven snow, the townsfolk whispered, and today her heart was a storm. Eliza's father, Reverend Josiah Thorne, had just delivered a fire and brimstone sermon about sin and salvation, his voice cracking like a whip over the congregation. But it was not his words that haunted her now. It was the stranger who had ridden into town at dawn, a giant of a man on a horse the color of midnight. They called him Colt McAllister, the giant cowboy, standing 7 feet tall in his boots, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and hands that could crush a steer's skull. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, a drifter, a gunslinger, a man who had tamed wild mustangs and outlaws alike. Yet no one knew the weight he carried in his heart. Eliza had seen him from the church window as he tied his horse to the hitching post. His Stetson was pulled low, but she caught a glimpse of eyes the color of storm clouds, eyes that held a sorrow deeper than the canyons. The town buzzed with rumors. Colt was here to settle a score, or maybe to rob the bank, or worse. But Eliza, with her quiet faith and unyielding kindness, felt something else. A pull. A whisper from God, perhaps, urging her to see the man beneath the legend. As the congregation filed out, chattering about the heat and the harvest, Eliza lingered. She was slight, with auburn hair braided neatly down her back and a face that carried the softness of youth but the strength of conviction. Her father had raised her on stories of grace and redemption, but he had also shielded her from the world's harshness. She had never known a man's touch, never strayed from the path of righteousness. Yet today, as she stepped onto the church porch, she saw Colt across the street, leaning against the saloon wall, his massive frame dwarfing the building. He was staring at the ground, lost in thought, and for a moment, the town's noise faded. Eliza's heart thudded. She didn't know why, but she crossed the dusty street, her boots kicking up small clouds of earth. "Sir," she called softly, her voice trembling but resolute. "Might I have a word?" Colt's head snapped up, and those storm cloud eyes locked onto hers. Up close, he was even more imposing, his face weathered by sun and wind, a scar running from his jaw to his ear like a lightning bolt. He straightened, towering over her, and Eliza felt like a sparrow before a mountain. "Miss," he rumbled, his voice deep as a well, "you ought to steer clear of men like me." But Eliza didn't flinch. "The Lord says to love thy neighbor," she said, her chin lifting. "And you look like a man who could use a kind word." Colt's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Kindness ain't something I'm used to, miss. And I ain't your neighbor." Eliza's father appeared then, striding across the street with his Bible tucked under his arm. "Eliza," he barked, his face red with alarm. "Get away from that man. He's trouble, girl, trouble with a capital T." The townsfolk paused, sensing a scene. Colt's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip, but he didn't draw. Instead, he tipped his hat to the Reverend. "No harm meant, preacher. Just passin' through." But Eliza saw something in Colt's eyes, a flicker of pain, a longing for something he couldn't name. She stepped between her father and the giant. "Papa, he's done nothing wrong. Let me speak with him." Reverend Thorne's eyes widened. "Eliza, you're innocent as a lamb, and this man's a wolf. I'll not have my daughter tainted by his kind." The words stung, but Eliza held her ground. "Judge not, Papa, lest ye be judged." The crowd murmured, shocked at her defiance. Colt, too, seemed stunned. No one had ever stood up for him, not in all his years of wandering. He opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden shout cut through the air. "McAllister," a voice snarled from the saloon doors. A man stepped out, lean and mean, with a sheriff's badge glinting on his chest. It was Deputy Harlan Pike, a known bully who lorded his power over Redemption Hollow. "You're under arrest for the murder of Jed Carver up in Abilene." The street froze. Colt's hand tightened on his gun. "That's a lie, Pike, and you know it. Jed was my friend. I'd never." "Save it for the judge," Pike snapped, drawing his pistol. The crowd scattered, women gasping, men reaching for their own weapons. Eliza's father grabbed her arm, pulling her back, but she wrenched free, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and conviction. "Stop," she cried, stepping into the space between Colt and the deputy. "There's been enough bloodshed." "Deputy Pike, you've no proof." Pike's eyes narrowed. "Girl, you're meddling in men's affairs. Get back to your daddy's church before you regret it." But Colt's voice boomed, low and dangerous. "You point that gun at her, Pike, and you'll answer to me." The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter. Eliza's mind raced. She didn't know Colt, didn't know the truth of his past, but she felt the weight of this moment. If she let this escalate, blood would spill. Her father's sermons echoed in her mind, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends." She didn't know if Colt was her friend, but she acted on faith. "Deputy," she said, her voice steady now, "if you arrest this man, do it lawfully. Take him to the jail, let the circuit judge hear his case. But no guns. Not here, not now." Pike hesitated, his authority challenged by a preacher's daughter. The crowd watched, breathless. Colt's eyes never left Eliza, and in them, she saw something shift, a crack in the armor of a man who had long ago stopped believing in goodness. Finally, Pike spat in the dust. "Fine. But he's comin' with me. And you, girl, stay out of it." Colt surrendered his gun, his massive hands raised. As Pike bound his wrists with rope, Colt looked at Eliza. "Why'd you do that, miss? You don't even know me." Eliza met his gaze. "Because someone has to believe there's good in you. Even if you don't." That night, in the tiny jailhouse, Colt sat on a cot too small for his frame, staring at the bars. Eliza's words echoed in his mind, stirring memories he'd buried deep. He hadn't always been the giant cowboy. Once, he'd been a boy in a small Missouri town, with a mother who sang hymns and a father who taught him to rope and ride. But a fever took his family, and a betrayal took his faith. He'd been running ever since, from the law, from himself. Jed Carver's death had been a setup, Pike's doing, he was sure, but proving it seemed impossible. Across town, Eliza couldn't sleep. Her father raged about her recklessness, forbidding her from going near the jail. But Eliza felt a calling, stronger than fear. She slipped out under the cover of darkness, a lantern in one hand and a basket of cornbread in the other. The jail was quiet, the deputy asleep at his desk. She found Colt in his cell, his head bowed. "I brought you something," she whispered, sliding the basket through the bars. Colt looked up, his face softening. "You're gonna get yourself in trouble, miss." "Eliza," she corrected. "And trouble's worth it if it means doing what's right." They talked through the night, their voices low. Colt told her about his losses, his loneliness, the weight of being feared rather than known. Eliza shared her dreams of a world where kindness triumphed over cruelty, where even the worst sinner could find grace. For the first time in years, Colt felt seen, not as a giant, not as a killer, but as a man. But dawn brought a twist neither expected. Pike, drunk on whiskey and power, decided he didn't need a judge. He gathered a posse, intent on lynching Colt before the circuit judge arrived. Word spread like wildfire, and Eliza overheard her father discussing it with the town elders. Her blood ran cold. She ran to the jail, only to find Pike dragging Colt into the street, a noose already in hand. "Eliza, get back!" Colt roared as the posse closed in. The sun rose over Redemption Hollow the next morning, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating a miracle. The town was transformed. Pike was locked in his own jail, awaiting the circuit judge, and Colt McAllister, the giant cowboy, was a free man. But freedom came with a cost. Eliza's reputation was in tatters, whispers followed her, calling her reckless, foolish, even tainted for standing so close to a man like Colt. Her father, torn between love and duty, had confined her to the house, fearing for her soul. Yet Eliza felt no regret. She sat by her window, her Bible open but unread, her thoughts on Colt. He had left at dawn, riding out of town with a tip of his hat and a promise to return. "I got debts to settle," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. "But you gave me something to come back for, Eliza. A reason to be better." She didn't know if he'd keep that promise. Men like Colt were storms, here one moment and gone the next. But she believed in him, in the spark of goodness she'd seen in his eyes. Her faith, tested by fire, had only grown stronger. Weeks passed, and Redemption Hollow tried to return to normal. The harvest came in, the church bells rang, and the townsfolk avoided Eliza's gaze. Her father preached forgiveness but struggled to forgive his daughter's defiance. Eliza, though, found peace in small acts of kindness, baking bread for the poor, teaching children to read, mending clothes for widows. She carried Colt's memory like a lantern, a reminder that one act of compassion could change a life. Then, on a crisp October evening, the unthinkable happened. A cry rang out from the edge of town, "Fire!" The general store, the heart of Redemption Hollow, was ablaze, flames licking the sky. The townsfolk scrambled, forming a bucket brigade, but the wind was fierce, and the fire spread to nearby homes. Eliza ran from the church, her father at her side, and saw the chaos. People screamed, children cried, and the air was thick with smoke. In the midst of it all, a lone figure rode into town, a giant on a midnight horse. Colt McAllister had returned. His coat was singed, his face grim, but his eyes burned with purpose. He leapt from his horse, barking orders with a voice that cut through the panic. "Men, form two lines. Women, get the children out. We ain't losing this town." The townsfolk, stunned, obeyed. Colt's strength was a marvel. He lifted burning beams with his bare hands, carried families to safety, and plunged into the inferno to rescue trapped shopkeeper Amos Reed. Eliza watched, her heart swelling, as the man she'd saved now saved others. But the fire was relentless, and the church, her father's pride, her childhood sanctuary, was next in its path. Reverend Thorne stood frozen, watching the flames creep closer. "My church," he whispered, "all I've built." Eliza grabbed his arm. "Papa, it's just a building. Lives matter more." But Colt heard the Reverend's despair. He turned, his massive frame silhouetted against the fire. "Preacher," he called, "your church ain't the wood and nails. It's the people. And we're Savon M." He rallied the brigade, directing water to the church's base. Eliza joined the line, passing buckets until her arms ached. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking, but hope flickered. Colt's leadership held the town together, and slowly, impossibly, the fire began to die. By dawn, the town was scarred but standing. The general store was gone, but no lives were lost. The church was blackened but intact. The townsfolk, exhausted, gathered in the square, looking to Colt with new eyes. He stood amidst the ashes, his hands blistered, his shirt torn, but his head high. Reverend Thorne approached, his face streaked with soot. "Mr. McAllister," he said, his voice breaking, "I misjudged you. You saved my town, my people, my daughter's faith in you was right." Colt shook his head. "Wasn't me, preacher. It was her. Eliza showed me what courage looks like. I just followed her lead." The crowd turned to Eliza, and for the first time, their whispers were of admiration, not scorn. She blushed, stepping forward to stand beside Colt. "We all did this together," she said. "Because we chose kindness over fear." But the story wasn't over. The circuit judge arrived that week, and Pike's lies unraveled. Colt had been framed. Jed Carver's real killer was Pike's own brother, a fact Colt had been chasing across 3 states. With the truth revealed, Colt was not only free but a hero. The town offered him land, a home, a future. But Colt had his own plan. On a quiet Sunday, with the church repaired and the town rebuilt, Colt stood before the congregation. He was nervous, his hands fidgeting with his hat, a sight that made Eliza smile. "Folks," he said, "I ain't much for words. But I owe you a debt. Eliza Thorne saved my life, not just from a noose but from a life without hope. I want to pay that forward." He turned to Reverend Thorne. "Sir, I'd like to build a school here. For the kids, so they learn readin', writin', and maybe a bit about second chances. I'll fund it with every penny I've got." The congregation gasped. Colt was known to have a fortune from years of bounty hunting, but no one expected this. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Her father, moved beyond words, clasped Colt's hand. "Son, you'd honor us." But Colt wasn't done. He faced Eliza, his voice softening. "Miss Eliza, you saw good in me when no one else did. You gave me a reason to believe in myself. I ain't worthy of you, but if you'd let me, I'd spend my life trying to be the man you think I am." The church was silent, every eye on Eliza. Her father stiffened, but his face held no anger, only hope. Eliza's heart raced. She was still the preacher's virgin daughter, bound by faith and duty, but she was also a woman who had seen the power of love to transform. "Colt," she said, her voice clear, "you're already that man. And I'd be proud to stand by your side." The congregation erupted in cheers. Reverend Thorne, tears in his eyes, embraced them both. The giant cowboy and the preacher's daughter had rewritten their story, proving that kindness could tame even the wildest heart. Years later, Redemption Hollow was known not for its dust or its struggles but for its school, where children of all backgrounds learned under the watchful eye of Eliza and Colt McAllister. The town thrived, a beacon of hope on the prairie. And every Sunday, as the church bells rang, Colt would take Eliza's hand, his giant frame no longer a symbol of fear but of strength, and they'd walk together, a testament to the power of compassion. The message was simple, carved into the school's cornerstone: in the darkest moments, one act of kindness can light the world. And in Redemption Hollow, that light never faded.